Today we're going to be talking about Erosion, an upcoming top-down shooter roguelike which just had a playtest go live on Steam yesterday. Now, if you're a returning viewer, you may remember this game because the trailer for this game was one of my best in show from Summer Games Fest a couple of weeks back, so I was very excited to play this game. And after spending a few hours on the playtest, I do have some thoughts, but they are mostly positive. So before we get started, the version of the game that I'm playing is a playtest and is currently classified as a pre-alpha, so this means that this game should be a fair ways away from launching. It's supposedly not meant to come out until 2027 at the earliest, which means that anything that I mentioned in this video could be subject to change or become fully obsolete over time. Now, Erosion follows a man the game only refers to as Pops as he tries to save his daughter, who was kidnapped and then taken into a mysterious pillar. And this game follows your typical roguelike dungeon crawler formula, where you need to go through a procedurally generated dungeon and fight bosses as you descend down floors. The only catch is that when you die in this game, time will pass 10 years. Which puts the pressure on not only saving your daughter, but also affects the other half of the game. So this game isn't just a roguelike dungeon crawler, but also has an open world overworld where you can roam around and do quests and work on meta progression that can make you stronger for the dungeon runs. The quests that you do also come with choices that can change the overworld when time passes. For instance, the first major quest you are given, you can choose to help a shop trader that lives in the main town rid a nearby farm of chicken cult worshippers, or you can choose to help the cult out. If you choose to help the shop trader, when time passes, he takes the town for himself and then runs it like a crime syndicate. And then you get a new quest to either help him escape town because he's very paranoid, or you can just kill him. But if you help the chicken cult out, then they take over the town instead, and then the next quest along is to help them spread their influence further out. Now, during the playtest, we're only given the first 2 decades worth of story, so it's kind of hard to see how far down it will all go and how much all of the choices will branch out from each other. And I've got to say that the game's premise is very ambitious. And for the most part, I think it's on the right track. For starters, I think the gameplay is very great. It's got a very solid control scheme. The guns feel fun to use and there's a lot of different ones you can try out. There are perks, upgrades and consumables that you can use to enhance yourself or enhance the guns, and it has some very good combos that you can make out of mechanics and the items that you combine. All signs of a typical decent roguelike. It definitely feels like it takes quite a bit of inspiration from The Binding of Isaac because it has a very similar health system, and the way the dungeons are structured where you're descending down and you're fighting a boss towards the end also feels very Binding of Isaac like, as well as all the abilities stacking together and, you know, making guns all feel different. Yeah, it's very Binding of Isaac like, but a bit more action heavy. Although I'm not really sure how I feel about the game only giving us one primary weapon and only having a whip as a backup. But I guess it does put some emphasis on ammo conservation because guns do have ammo, so it's not infinite. Look, overall I really like the dichotomy between the faster paced dungeon combat and the slower open world exploration side of the game. And I particularly like that you can use the time spent in the open world to gather like supplies and then take those into runs instead of just using the open world as an excuse for just static meta progression upgrades, because you do have a town that you can build up and upgrade and stuff through that as well. And it's a good way to give you a break from the more repetitive nature of the dungeon crawling experience. While the game says that when you die, time will pass 10 years, it's actually if you die 3 times. So every decade you get 3 chances, and so that those 3 lives are shared between the dungeon crawling and the overworld. So if you die in the overworld, that can take a life away from you, which is much more generous than what I was thinking. It didn't feel like those 3 lives were necessary in the playtest, but again, the game is a bit of an unknown after the second decade, and how big it is and how hard it gets, those 3 lives might actually be needed. So the playtest is limited to the first 2 dungeon biomes as well as the first 2 decades of time. So one of the biggest unknowns of the game is that because it feels like that technically you can beat the game very early on in the timeline. And one of my biggest worries is that if the game is technically completable early on via the dungeon part of the game, does that end the game, or is all of the overworld content still going to be there to do afterwards? And I kind of get the feeling that the answer to that question is potentially a story spoiler, so I'm probably not going to prod at it too much, but that is one of my biggest questions leading into the full game whenever that releases. Before we move on from gameplay though, I do just want to talk about the bosses real quick. I think the boss designs are also really, really good. The first boss is a giant snake that roams around like, I guess, the classic Snake game. And the second is a vampire lady that spawns a bunch of minions and they do thriller dancing. I don't know what else they're there for, but they just kind of are annoying. Both fights are really, really fun. Both have really cool design elements and mechanics. The snake does feel a little bit too easy, while the vampire lady does feel a bit too hard, but I'm okay with that because I really like them nonetheless. And they also have some really cool intro animations, and I'm keen to just see what else the full game is able to cook up. One of the parts that I think Erosion really excels in, and if you've been watching the video you probably have already picked up on it, is the art style. Erosion's art is done in a voxel style, which I think looks absolutely fantastic. The design fits the weird sci-fi western aesthetic going on, but it also looks great because most of the environment is destructible, and the look of the destruction is simulated. So if you shoot an object or an enemy and the way it falls apart looks different every time, which I love. Now, if you are destroying like objects or scenery, the destruction itself is actually static. You know, it's either there or it's not, and that doesn't kind of fully line up with how the destruction itself looks, which I'm going to kind of give the game a pass on, because if it isn't how it is like right now, then you just be getting stuck on like bits of environment like all over the place. It is a tiny bit immersion breaking, but it isn't really that big of a deal to me. But I do like that a lot of the environment is destructible though. But what I would like to see is maybe for the game to put a bit more emphasis on using objects as cover for combat. And look, like I said, like probably 80 to 90% of the game is a bit of an unknown at the moment. But that feels like a part of the game that isn't really being utilized, that feels like it's right there for the picking. Moving on to music, so far I'm really liking the music in this game. It is very western, and even when the backdrops and art style of the game kind of drop the western aesthetic, the music doesn't. It's very similar to Far Far West soundtrack, but it stays more traditionally western when Far Far West went more into like kind of electronic and techno. But I'm a fan of this. So there is atmospheric music for when you're roaming about and battle music for when you get into a battle, which is pretty stock standard, and it works great because the transitions are actually pretty decent. There is a slight problem though, because some of the battle encounters can be very short, and you'll have the battle music kick in for like 5 to 10 seconds before fading out again, and it is kind of annoying. And I reckon it would be fine just to not have the battle music kick in every time you get into combat and just leave it for the larger encounters, so it doesn't get too repetitive. So yeah, because this is a playtest, the game is a little bit buggy. I've ran into a couple of unkillable floating enemies, unreachable items because they fell in weird spots, just unfinished art assets, the usual stuff that you find when you are looking at games that are this early on. But I do have a list of things that I do think the game needs to work on, kind of nitpicks that I think should probably be looked at. First off, the UI needs a lot of work. It does seem very placeholdery though, but it does not suit the vibe of the game, and I'm mainly talking about the timelines menu. The map could also use with some better navigation. Things like having the quest areas labeled as what quest they are from, because right now you can only track one quest at a time, and that shows up in it's like kind of a blue circle, while all the other ones are just unknown yellow ones. It'd be nice if you could at least like mouse over them while you're in the map menu to see what they are. Passive items, backpack items, and usable items don't really have many ways to distinguish themselves from each other. Pretty much you just kind of have to learn what they are or just pick them up to find out. And I think it'd be cool if there was a way to just kind of instantly tell before you do that. It's not so much of a big deal. It would probably in the end only save you like 5 seconds here and there, but it'd just be nice to know what you're picking up is going to go into your backpack slot, which is limited, or your passive slot, which seems to be unlimited. Maybe I'm missing something there, but for now it looks like on the surface that you just kind of have to learn all the items and what they do. There are a lot of currency and resource counters, and I think that if you're picking them up, they should go up incrementally or give some kind of flashy effect when you pick stuff up, so the player can more easily see themselves gain currencies and how much they're gaining. Right now it's kind of instant and it's kind of hard to keep track of. I think there are certain like treasure chests that you can open that give currency, and there isn't really like a animation going on, so sometimes it just feels like you're opening a box with nothing in it. There are currencies going up sometimes and I just never notice it. There are pets and followers in this game, and they can get in the way of interacting with other NPCs or opening chests. They can just stand in the way, which is annoying and should probably be fixed. There is quite a bit of sound design missing from the game. I imagine that's, on the way. So the atmosphere of some places can feel a bit bland or a bit wrong. The whole intro of the game currently just doesn't feel right. There was no music at all. I don't know if that was a glitch or it's still to come. It felt super weird nonetheless. And yeah, I would just also like to see some more NPCs that you can interact with throughout the world, or maybe just a few extra lines of dialogue to see about the place. I think the writing in the game is a bit decent. It probably needs a couple more passes, but I just like to see a little bit more depth around the open world overall, just with interactable NPCs, maybe a few more lines of dialogue from quest givers, and things like that. So during the playtest, I was having some performance issues. This was mostly in the open world because there is so much more going on. I'll chuck my specs on the screen so you can see. For the most part, during the first level of the dungeon, my FPS was at like 120 plus, which was good. But the second level of the game had me running down towards like 60 FPS around there. And then in the open world, we're looking at like 40 FPS and under. The game was never what I would call unplayable. And there is a disclaimer on the main menu that this is a problem that the developers are aware of and working on. So I'd like to see how much that improves towards the full release. So in conclusion, while the playtest for Erosion was a bit jagged in spots, this game is actually showing some very good promise. Based on what I played, I do think this game is probably about a year away if I'm being generous. And if there is that much time put into polishing and refining the game, I can see myself absolutely loving it. The playtest is live now and will be live until the 1st of July, I think. And I do think it's worth checking out if you can. It has about 3 hours of content in it, but more if you want to replay and screw around with different choices in the overworld. I'd definitely be interested in giving this one the full review treatment when the game releases, whenever that is. I think it would be fun, but how good the game will be on release is probably left down to how much content will ultimately be in the full game. So that's all for now, so thank you so much for watching. If you have made it this far, then please leave a like and also consider subscribing if you're new. As always, many thanks to my YouTube members for their continued support, absolute legends, and that's all. So thank you so much for watching again, and I will see you all in the next one.